Hi, I'm Rachel. Welcome to Life on Purpose. I invite you to join in on this journey to live a life of deep meaning and intention. A quick note before you listen to this podcast. You may hear some extra noise because of the microphone I was using as I was recording this, but I did not want to change that. I wanted to keep it in the situation of where I was recording this. So thank you so much for your patience and understanding, and I hope you enjoy. Tonight I'm at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and I wanted to record this to document this experience and also share with you a miraculous story that we experienced in our family. A few years ago, this was during COVID time, we were walking around quite a bit with our family outside in the neighborhood, and Preston, our youngest, started mentioning that his knees were hurting after just walking for a very short amount of time. And this was very unusual because he had danced, he had played soccer, we had walked all over Europe, and that just was not the norm for him. We did some investigation with our doctors and found that he had hip dysplasia. And so he was scheduled to begin surgeries. So we started on the left hip, and they broke his pelvis to create a hip socket for him. And he was not casted properly after that surgery. And so some things came out of place, and they had to redo that surgery. So there were 2 surgeries on the left hip and that recovery process. And then the surgery on the right hip, and where they again created that hip socket, and then recovery from that. And then he did a year of physical therapy with these 2 new hip sockets that had been created. But because of the trauma, the arthritis in those hip sockets, he ended up being very bent forward at his hips. He was not able to stand upright and walk. He was very far bent over. He was able to use a walker, and he was in a wheelchair quite a bit as well. And that is not what we wanted for Preston, someone who had been so active in his life and has so much energy. We wanted him to be able to function a little bit better. So we got in touch with the doctor again and asked for some options of things we could do. And the option that was presented to us is that they would not be willing to do a hip replacement on Preston, but they would be willing to fuse his hip in place, basically so that it would be upright, it would be forced to be upright, and he would kind of walk in a different way, but at least he would be upright. And we just did not feel good about that. And so we decided to do nothing for a while until we got to a point where we understood what the next step was. So after this whole process, we were out in Colorado visiting our kids out there, and we went to a congregation of worship on a Sunday that we were out there. And we just randomly chose a congregation and a time that fit into our schedule. And as we walked in to that congregation, someone in that congregation came up to my husband, Brian, and stopped him and said, "Hey, I have some questions about your son. I see how he's walking there. Will you tell me about him?" So Brian explained the surgeries and the hip dysplasia and where we were kind of at. And this man said, "Oh, you have to go see this doctor at Cincinnati Children's. I studied under him. I am a pediatric orthopedic surgeon. He is the Dr. Sorger. And we got the information and we came back to Ohio and just felt so blessed to have gone to a random church meeting on a Sunday in Colorado and had someone come up to us and give us an answer, give us some guidance that we hadn't even really been asking for specifically. It was just miraculous, and I could not even make up a story that good. So we came back to Ohio. We set up an appointment with Dr. Soldier to meet him, and we met with him and did all the testing that he wanted, determined that he may be a good child to receive hip replacements, but he wanted us to go to his doctor friend in Detroit. So we made an appointment with him, waited for months and months because these specialists are so busy and their time is just so valuable because they're just highly respected. And so we went and saw this doctor up in Detroit and got his opinion as he looked at Preston's case and what he'd been through and where he was at the moment. And I really appreciate these doctors' thoughtfulness because they really are thoughtful and know that there are risks with any surgery and really wanted to be able to make a good decision and give good advice, seeing as Preston was not in any pain the way he was functioning. It was just quite limiting him. So after we visited the doctor in Detroit, we went back to Dr. Sarger and talked with him again and decided to start with the first hip replacement. So that was a year ago this month when we had that first hip replacement. And typically having an understanding of how to move, how to heal is something that, maybe the typical hip replacement applicant would be able to understand. But Preston, with his developmental disabilities, we had to be especially careful to help him understand how he had to keep his body aligned to heal. And it's just so amazing that he healed perfectly. And his hip has been so functional and we've been so pleased with how much more upright he's able to walk and so much more freedom that he has. So he did months and months of physical therapy to get that left hip as functional as possible. And then we got to the point again where therapy was being limited because of the right hip. And so today he had his second hip replacement, which went amazingly well. And we're so grateful for that. Preston is doing so well. He brings smiles to everyone's faces and is just so loving. And it's lovely to see him interact in such a fun way, even though he went through such an extreme procedure on his body. And so he's doing wonderfully. But I wanted to make sure and document this experience that we had and share it with you, because to me, it helps me have a belief, a faith that we are being watched over, that we are loved, that sometimes we're given answers even when we are not specifically asking for them. And they show up in just beautiful ways, that in ways you can't deny that God had a hand in that, in bringing those pieces together, in having this man talk with Brian at this congregation we randomly chose on a Sunday in Colorado. So this scripture in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God. And I don't think this means that everything in our life is good, but all things work together for good. And it also reminded me of this quote that I love. God does notice us and he watches over us, but it is usually through another person that he meets our needs. Oh, it just reminds me to make sure that I am following my soul promptings when I am to say something, reach out to someone else, and what a difference that can make in their life. And just the beautiful way that sometimes people are brought together and circumstances are brought together so that God is unmistakably noticed in our lives.
Thank you so much for joining me today. You can check out more over at rachelegbert.com. Your life is too precious to live just by chance or by default. I want you to live your life on purpose. We will see you next time.